Welcome to the CBF Podcast Conversation. We know that conversations matter, so each week we are grinding through the critical research to bring you the best stories and resources of people doing groundbreaking and innovative work in renewing God's world. I'm Andy Hale, your podcast host. This year we are starting our 9th year of the podcast, bringing you even better interviews worth your time, attention, and collaboration. These episodes are not intended for you to listen to in an island unto yourself. Get online and share your insights, thoughts, and feedback from the podcast on CBF's X, Facebook, and Instagram pages. We also want you to join the CBF podcast community through the CBF Podcast Listener Support page at cbf.net/podcast support. We want to give a special shout out for some of our listener supporters, including the Honorable Charles Qualls, Caroline Bell, Cindy Foldenlore, Trip Hawthorne, Bill Johnson, Carson Fushi, Ralph Stocks, and then a generous anonymous donor that keeps giving in honor of CBF Grump. Thanks for listening, Apex, North Carolina, Anderson, South Carolina, Garland, Texas, Montreal, Canada, Jacksonville, Florida, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Johannesburg, South Africa. First-time listeners or long-time listeners, we are grateful you were here for the conversation. And before we move on, we want to give a word of gratitude to our annual sponsors, including the Union Presbyterian Seminary Baptist House of Studies, the Garland School of Social Work at Baylor University, Creation Justice Ministries, Baptist Seminary of Kentucky, the Center for Congregational Health, Dawnings, Community Transformation Center, Congregational Ministries Team of CBF Global, and Gardner-Webb University School of Divinity. And now, on to our conversation. Our guest for this week's CBF Podcast Conversation is Dr. Karen Swallow Prior. Karen is a widely respected writer, professor of English, Christianity and culture, speaking and cultural commentator. She's the author of multiple books, including Booked on Reading Well, then an Evangelical Imagination, and her newest book, You Have a Calling. Karen, thank you for joining the conversation.
It's great to be on with you.
Well, I said pre-record, you have been on my bucket list to have on this podcast for a long time. So excited to have you on. Look forward to the conversation. I have been following your work and your writing for years, but maybe for those that aren't familiar with your work, not that there's anybody out there that isn't, what would you want folks to know about you and your journey?
Whew, yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure there are plenty of people who have never heard of me before, and that's wonderful for them. I am a longtime former English professor teaching in evangelical spaces and institutions, more recently, in the past couple of years, moved into full-time writing and speaking after going through a lot of the stuff that a lot of evangelicals go through in those spaces. So I write a lot about literature and culture, do a lot of cultural criticism, write for Religion News Service, a monthly column, and the Dispatch on occasion. So writer, reader, speaker, guest.
Well, we don't have to talk about the recent shifts in the last couple of years, more public shifts, but I guess in kind of having to talk about this so often, talk to us about kind of the new chapter or the newness of what you've experienced as you transitioned out of some of those spaces.
Hmm. Well, and not coincidentally, this is partly the subject of my new book that we'll be talking about, vocation and calling, and sort of the transitions that those can entail throughout life. Yeah, for me, it's been a big transition because as I said, I was an English professor for 24 years as a full-time professor, first at Liberty University, then at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And so I love classroom teaching. I love teaching literature. Sometimes I was teaching doctoral students, MDiv students, and DMin students, but my first love is literature. And reading literature to learn about life and to live life better. I think literature gives us that gift. But I've been writing for a long time and speaking for a long time. So it was kind of a gradual, long transition in that sense. So I'm grateful for that because I'm a person who doesn't like change. So big changes like that are hard, but it's been good. And I think it's what the Lord had for me, even if he had to give me kind of a hard push out of the nest to do it. Yeah.
There are two professions that I am fearful of preaching in front of. I've been preaching since I was 14 years old. Number one is preaching in front of former professors of mine and seminary or undergrad religion, which I do often because I'm asked to preach at my alma mater, occasionally. The other is I've pastored a church in university town, and English professors are stressful to preach in front of because every time I speak, I'm like, well, I don't know if that was grammatically correct or not, but I'm sure I'm sure they're dying inside right now listening to this. So, um,
Well, maybe I can't speak for all English professors, but I tell you, when we're not working, we're not working. I don't grade for free, so
yeah. Uh, well, let's transition to the new book. You have a calling. This book examines how vocation is not merely about what we do, but who we are becoming in response to God's voice and the needs in the world. And you wrote, the idea that you must find your passion and then make a living doing it is a modern invention. It's also a lie. Let's start with that lie. Why do you think that myth has become so dominant in our modern culture? And how do we recover a more faithful framework?
Hmm. Yeah, well, we'll get right down to it, won't we? I mean, there's a longer answer, which I will give, and then maybe a shorter one. But I mean, the whole era of modernity is one that is focused on the individual and individual autonomy, and then also individual uniqueness and passion and all of those things that go with it. I mean, some of you listeners may have heard of Carl Trueman's very popular book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, and there's a condensed version of that. It's a look at how particularly 19th century literature, the Romantic poets and philosophers invented sort of the modern self and individual expressivism. That's just the air that we breathe. I happen to really love modernity in many ways and love individuals, the idea of the individual. But it's in its excesses, we really focus so much on our uniqueness, our desires, our passions that I mean, we all know this, that we've kind of lost what it means to live in community and to live in service to our neighbors and our families and one another. We've replaced sort of one extreme of the ancient world with the other extreme of the modern world. That's the long history, but then the shorter history is that we add to that social media, right? And social media influencers and these big pictures that are presented before us of people who've just, dropped everything, pursued a passion, and within a year they're bringing in, six-figure salaries or something like that. We have this false image put up in front of us on a daily basis that distorts our perception of what it means to work and to have a calling. And then we add on that sort of a Christian distortion, a distortion that we've seen in the church, which is that, everyone is supposed to do big things for God, or everyone is supposed to change the world. And that's a false idol as well. And so in all of that, again, sometimes those things do happen, sometimes they can be good, but the bigger picture is one that's very, very different. And that's the one I try to describe in my book.
You're going to right. Vocation is not something we create or design. It's not even something we choose. It's something we discover.
Mhm.
How did you were kind of alluding to this before. How did your own story of discovery, and not just direction influence this book?
Hmm. Well, and my story goes back a long time, and I share some of this in the book. I mean, I just said earlier that I spent 25 years, actually more, as a classroom professor. And I love teaching. I believe I was created to teach. I love being in the classroom. I didn't discover that until I was on my way to earning my PhD, and I did not plan to teach. I just fell into it providentially and learned that I loved it and never looked back. And so even finding that calling was not, it took me by surprise. I fulfilled that calling for all those years, as I said, and now I'm out of the classroom. And yet I still believe that I'm made and called to teach, and there are other ways to teach. My writing is very teacherly, it's very didactic, it's very like this is the right way to think about things, or here's a way to think about things. And so that's a shift, not necessarily in vocation or calling, but in the form that that calling takes. And so sometimes it can be semantics. It can just boil down to semantics, the words that we use and the categories that we use. But words are powerful and important. And sometimes being able to name what has happened, name what we're doing, name the category, the calling that we have, can be transformative. It can help us to see that we are fulfilling a calling that was not of our own making, that we got a call, we heard it, we answered it. And there are lots of ways that we might do that throughout our lives.
You offer a rich theological, philosophical framework rooted in transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty. You write that the truth, the good, and the beautiful are marks of God's calling and what it means, which we discern it. Can you walk us through how these qualities become tools for vocational discernment?
Hmm. Well, of course, in some ways, this book was just kind of a trick to get readers to think about the true, the good, and the beautiful but in a way that can be personally applicable and hopefully inviting. But really, I do because I love literature and because I love art and I love beauty and therefore love truth and goodness. I talk about these things all the time and teach about them. And I had never really thought about it in terms of vocation until this book was sort of taking form in my mind. And since I talk about truth, goodness, and beauty as much as I can, I just began to think, well, how does that apply to our work lives, to our calling? And so, because I think, truth, goodness, and beauty sound very abstract, and they are very transcendental, and it seems like that would be the last thing that would be helpful to us as we figure out, what is it we're supposed to do in our lives every day. Yeah, because that question about what we're supposed to do with our lives every day can be so hard and so confusing and so shifting. Truth, goodness, and beauty stand in contrast in that they are universal and they are transcendent and they don't depend on our changing circumstances or the time and place in which we find ourselves. So my thesis basically is that if we pursue truth, goodness, and beauty, we're going to find our callings along the way. And then I do try to make that a little bit more practical in those chapters and talk about what does it mean to pursue truth in our work and our calling and goodness and beauty. And I think Christians especially are really well versed in the truth part. We love to talk about truth and what the truth is, and I love truth as well. But we don't talk about beauty as much, and we don't really we think we do, but I don't think we really talk about goodness that much either. Like just like the goodness of the world, the goodness of creation, the goodness of what we can do every day in the everyday world. And so I try to draw out some of those things in those chapters.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Passion comes from within, calling comes from without. Um, in a world where we're taught to follow our bliss or to craft our personal brands, I know you're kind of teasing about that earlier. That's a countercultural statement that you're making. So how does this distinction matter for those seeking meaning in their lives and in what they do?
Hmm. And again, I think that really is a central point that I'm trying to make in this book is to distinguish between the things that we feel and sense and desire inside, which, we're human beings, so we're going to have those things, and then the sort of external objective callings and needs and places and circumstances in which we live. Um, and the whole point of pursuing our calling is to kind of find the fit in between those things and distinguishing between, I think is helpful anyway, to distinguish between what's inner and what's outer, between what we desire and have a passion for and what the world and others want or need us to do, and to realize that they won't always match. The thing that I say in the book is that, it we hear people say that they feel like they have a calling or they sense they have a calling. And what I want to say when I hear that is, okay, well, who is calling you? Because calling very literally is something that comes from outside, even if it's something that we sense or hear or respond to internally. So we really can't be called unless we have a caller. And obviously, God is the ultimate caller, but He uses the people in our lives, the situations, circumstances, to call us. And and the way that that can be freeing, I think, is that sometimes we do have interest, skill, passion, desire, that we're not being called to use. And wrestling with that can be difficult, but knowing that they don't always automatically match up can help us to sort of just live in the truth about the way the world works and the way that, we might be able to pursue something outside of work. We might pursue our passion or desire and not get paid for it, which is how most of the humans in human history have lived. So that just having that broad understanding and more realistic expectation, I think, can measure our expectations and temper our uh, the same expectations so that we don't constantly live in a state of disappointment and angst because reality isn't matching up with our distorted vision of how things are supposed to be.
Mm. There's a strong theme throughout the book that calling is confirmed in community, not in isolation or algorithms. You state that calling comes from God and is confirmed by real people who really know us. You know, as an ordained minister, I think of my ordination and the kind of the affirmation process, but also the testing process of going through that, which is far different than a lot of ordinations today. That is more of kind of a "we love you, bless you" kind of go on thing. Not to say that I had it more difficult than others, but what does that look like practically for someone discerning their faithful, next step? Especially kind of maybe for those that are coming out of an evangelical culture in which so much focus is put on the personal relationship with
Mhm.
Christ, right? Versus kind of the church as an essential part of our faith journey.
Yeah, especially, one of the defining characteristics of evangelicalism is our emphasis on the individual, right? In our individual conversion, our individual testimony. And again, those are wonderful, important things, but they aren't the whole picture. So I do think it's helpful to think about the role that community has in helping us to find and fulfill our callings. And so in a practical sense, if we are facing the proverbial closed door, which most of us do over the course of our lives and sometimes more than once, then we can turn to the community, reach out, look for the doors that are open, ask people about our giftings, listen to what people tell us about what our giftings are, because sometimes we might have this vision like, I want to be a musician up on the stage performing before people, and you're not getting those invitations, but maybe you are getting invitations to do some other thing, to teach or to serve in some other way, to encourage other people. So when people are asking us to do things, that doesn't mean we have to do them because that can be abusive. But when people are asking us to do things and naming in us gifts and skills that we might not realize we have, that's can be a nudge toward what our calling is. So if people aren't doing that, then we can go out of our way to ask and to put ourselves in situations and settings where we're able to serve, because that's what calling is for. That's another, important thing to remember, is that the callings that we fulfill are there because they are there to serve our neighbors. And so just being plugged in and being part of a community is necessary before we can even begin to hear from that community about the callings that we might be able to fill.
Hmm. So coincidentally, today I had to go to an actual bank to get something notarized. It was so weird. It's like I couldn't tell you the last time I stepped foot in one of these things, and I sat down with the branch manager, and somehow struck up a conversation that led to her sharing, Yeah, she left ministry 2 years ago, and she worked in a church for
Mhm.
8 years. And what became dicey was when she went through the process of divorce,
Mm.
and how the church, despite it being her home church, the church she grew up in, treated her differently, but how she has found more vocational fulfillment as a
Mm.
follower of Christ, as a branch manager in the
Mm.
conversations she has. And she says, even sitting down and talking to you today, I have these conversations. I feel like I'm making a difference in people's lives. So talk to us about
Mm.
that. We talk about this theology of vocation, the sense of calling. More or less, we talk about this more in the church when it comes to ministers and the application within the church, or other contexts. But why is that so important as a key piece of this
Mm.
conversation?
I am, that is so great that you had that experience today and can share that story. That is such a great story and so illustrative of what I'm trying to talk about in this book. And, it's an amazing irony that Protestants of all people have lost this understanding that the Protestant reformers just gave to the world and to the church about vocation and calling, and insisted that there is no higher calling, there is no division between sacred and secular, and that was such a gift to the church and to the world. And yet here we are, in 21st century American evangelicalism. It's so common to hear explicitly, or just even in more underlying implicit ways, that somehow being in ministry or being in full-time ministry is really the way to show that you love God and love his church and want to serve his people. That's just one way. And some people, probably fewer than are doing it, are called to that. But we can do the same noble service, fulfill same high callings in ordinary everyday work. And the banker that you talked to today shows that so perfectly. We aren't doing greater service to the Lord if we're serving, if our paycheck comes from a church, or from a Christian organization. We can serve the Lord in all of the different callings within the church, outside the church, for pay or not for pay. Some of the most important roles that people fulfill are, in the family, and don't bring in income. But all of these ways, if they are true, good, and beautiful, are as noble as anything that is done in the church.
You explore, you know, uh, how virtue formation is essential to calling, and particularly the classical virtues of prudence and fortitude and temperance and justice. Why is it not enough to simply know our gifts? Why must we form
Mm.
habits to sustain our calling?
Yeah, I mean, that's another love of mine, is the virtues, which I explore much more deeply in my book on reading well, which is actually about, pursuing the virtues through reading literature, but also through life. I mean, because, we are fallen creatures, and even if we are in the Lord, we still need to be formed more in his likeness. And that is a process that certainly has a supernatural element to it with the presence of the Holy Spirit, but it also has very sort of human, material, physical elements to it, in the sense of developing habits and patterns and practices that help us become better people, to become virtuous people. That just simply doesn't happen by accident. We don't become um, courageous by continually choosing the cowardly thing, or we don't become diligent by continually being lazy. We have to work at these things, and knowing that we have to work at them, and desiring to pursue and those virtues, and reflect them more and more because they reflect the person of Christ, is something that we have to be intentional about. And it applies to all kinds of work and all kinds of callings and vocations. And again, it's a reflection of the transcendent nature of these virtues and what is true, good, and beautiful.
You write about patience, saying patience is not passivity, it's the long obedience of staying when others flee or suffering when others run. Um, How does patience reframe failure and redirection in our vocational lives?
Mhm. Yeah, again, it's so countercultural to just sort of stay and be patient and do things for over the long haul. And again, if we're looking at these social media influencers I looked at before, talked about before, who look like they are overnight successes and raking in the money, pursuing their passions, it sets up a very unrealistic picture of what real virtue looks like in our work and in our callings, and that it requires patience. And one of the scholars that I cite a few times in the book is Cal Newport, who just simply does his research is on work and good work and deep work. He's well known in this field, and he actually also says that the pursue your passion idea is a myth and counters through his research the reverse, that it's actually competence and skill that develop over time that make people tend to be more passionate about their work. So if you stay and you do something and you become good at it, then you actually end up becoming passionate about it. But we don't know that we might develop a passion until we do that work, that patient work of staying, learning, overcoming failures, doing better. It doesn't mean we should never figure out that we need to go in a different direction or pursue a different kind of work. Of course, those things happen, but we have to have a place for passion and virtue even as we make those decisions.
There's a deep sense of freedom that emerges from this book. Not freedom to do whatever we want, but freedom to do, to be who we are created to be. And you're right. Freedom is the ability to do what we ought, not just what we want. How do we cultivate, and maybe thinking more kind of discipleship driven here for congregations, how do we cultivate that kind of freedom when the world constantly pulls us in a dozen directions and especially pushes us to earn more money, to be busier in what we do.
Mm, mm. I mean, the church is a place where really we should be doing this countercultural work. Um, just simply, the church is a place that embodies these things, actually. Just the idea of meeting together once a week and sort of doing the same thing every week together with the same people who are people we might not choose to spend time with otherwise, because we don't perhaps have much else in common with them, but that's really a picture of the body, which consists of many parts, universally, but also in our local congregations. And I think the church too needs to be intentional in knowing the times, knowing what the culture is teaching and advocating and embodying, and pushing against that where it errs from the abundant life. So it's a great time for the church to be speaking into these ideas of vocation and calling, because I think a lot of people are struggling with it. Not just the college and career age, although they are certainly in that place in life. But I've talked to a lot of, middle-aged women who stayed home for most of their lives raising children, who feel like they didn't have a calling or they missed a calling, and nothing could be further from the truth. If they can only see the truth, goodness, and beauty and the giftings and the callings that they were fulfilling in those roles, then they can take more joy in what they did, and also see how God is using those things and will continue to use those things through every season of life.
Let's talk about failure. You're right. Failure is not the opposite of calling; it's part of it. I think specifically of the number of ministers over the last couple years. Really pre-pandemic, really starting in 2016, and kind of moving forward, that have resigned and moved on to other things. And I talk to many that talk about that sense of failure, failure to fulfill their calling, failure to take care of themselves, in these things. But it goes beyond just vocational ministry. Can you speak to us, maybe to those who feel like they've missed their calling or taken the wrong turn, and what your wisdom is for those that feel like it's too little, too late, especially if they've stepped out of one vocation and are trying to find another.
Mhm. I mean, it sounds sort of glib to say, and I don't mean it that way at all, but I mean, in God's perfect economy, He really does use it all. And I think we need to really believe that and own it. And I can't imagine this because I've never been a minister. But I do think that there's an extra sort of weight when you feel like you're called by God to serve, His people in this vocational way, and when that doesn't work out. But there is no more failure in that than in a person figuring out, oh, they need to switch their major from, accounting to English or something, and kind of learning along the way. We all do that, and God will use it all. And we minister to His people in all the different kinds of vocations, and callings that He has for us. And He will use it all. I mean, I've seen that in my life, and we see it in so many lives. And again, um, people who are not preaching and serving in the church full time are able to fulfill just as high a calling outside the church. And God will use those seeming failures to help people stay on the path. It's might be a different route, but they will find their way in the service of the Lord.
There's a theological thread running throughout the book that ties to calling to incarnation itself. You wrote that the ultimate calling is not to a job or a role, but Christ Himself. What does it mean for you that calling begins and ends with Jesus?
Mhm. Well, what it means is that first of all, to go back to your last question, if even if I do sort of make a mistake or mishear a call or go down a path that turned out to be a bad decision, um, I have done that. Um, I know that He encompasses it all. He's bigger than it all. And so that does free me to be okay with the mistakes that I made and to also be okay with the fact that I really don't even know if it was a mistake or not. Because if He's going to use it, how could it be a mistake? And so knowing that He is encompasses it all, He holds it all, He redeems it all, that just makes even the successes, as well as the failures, pale in comparison, in their significance, because He's going to use it, and it's for His glory and not for my own.
For some people listening to this, they might feel tired or uncertain or directionless. What is the most compassionate first step they can take towards discovering their calling?
Hmm. I think the most compassionate first step is to recognize that weariness and tiredness and fear and all of those things, are normal and natural. Not even just in the face of failure, but even in the face of success. And part of what we need to do, in this culture to be counterculture, is to slow down, is to rest, to think about quality over quantity, and to measure things through the eyes of eternity, not through just spreadsheets and accounting and math formulas. Um, so sorry, you might have to edit this out. We have a hungry dog here.
I didn't even hear it
Okay,
from my end, so
okay. So I lost track of my train. Hopefully you won't lose that whole thing, but what
that's
was
okay.
I saying?
Uh,
Oh, and the weird, yeah. Um, I think that we live in a culture that, emphasizes busyness and hurry and quantity over quality so much that we don't give ourselves grace to rest and to be okay with feeling weary and feeling, perhaps confused or disappointed. Those are normal and natural things in our callings and in everyday life. And the most important thing that we can do is give ourselves grace, to accept that reality and know that those days and those hours and minutes will pass and those feelings will pass, and to rest until the next calling comes or the next success comes, because life is definitely a pilgrimage that has, highs and lows. I'm in the process now of finishing up a series on the Pilgrim's Progress. So I'm thinking a little bit in allegorical terms, but it's a beautiful allegory for what our real life pilgrimages can be like.
Hmm. And Leslie, as we think about congregational leaders listening to this, how can we better affirm and nurture calling within our faith communities?
Hmm. I think we have to make a decision to do it. It's maybe something that churches aren't thinking about. And fortunately, we do have a lot of tools helpful to us. I mean, the Bible itself talks about the giftings that people have, and it's common, but perhaps can be refreshed and renewed. The idea of helping members identify what their gifts and callings are, finding places for them to use those, not only in service to the church, but even in the community. We have lots of tools and resources to use if we want to use them. And also, again, just to realize that teaching and discipleship and spiritual formation aren't just about the supposedly, holy, spiritual, sacred things, but they're also greatly needed um, in terms of how we live out and form virtue and character in the everyday world, in our work. It's not just about the holiness and the piety, but it's in how we do our jobs, how we interact with our neighbors, how we serve our neighbors. There are lots of opportunities for us to live out our callings as believers in this world in those contexts.
Our guest is Dr. Karen Swallow Prior. The book is You Have a Calling. You can stay connected with her by visiting KarenSwallowPrior.com. Karen, it's been a joy speaking with you. Thank you for reminding us that our lives are not problems to solve, but stories to live, and that calling is found not in control, but in becoming.